Hello, world. And welcome back to another episode of Practicing Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. My name is Sarah, and I'm here with my friend Lizelle. And today we're going to be talking about episode 32, which is called Relevance Realization in the Brain, Insight, and Consciousness. So, as I always do, I'm going to pass it over to Lizelle to get us started with a quote.
Hello, world. Now I'm going to go to Socrates speaking in Gorgias. Oh, my friend, I want you to see that the noble and the good may possibly be something different from saving and being saved. May not he who is truly a man cease to care about living a certain time? He knows, as women say, that no man can escape fate, and therefore he is not fond of life. He leaves all that with God and considers in what way he can best spend his appointed term. So what immediately comes to my mind is that reference John makes somewhere in the episode of it's not about just the length of time, it's about the appropriate time. That really hit me as well when I was listening. Kairos. It's the appropriate time.
Yeah. He says that right at the end, too, right?
I think so.
Yeah.
It is a very kairotic episode, actually.
It
Uh,
is. Yeah.
when we get to the self-organizing, what is the thing? Self-organizing criticality. Then that is, if you remember, I already actually mentioned that I once spoke to him about how he sees Kairos, and he views Kairos in that way. That the moment the extra grain of sand, the one grain of sand,
Mm-hmm.
makes a particular move, and the whole structure changes. That is a kairotic moment.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So,
Yeah. He goes way back in this one, too. It's interesting. We had that. Oh, gosh. That's exactly what we did with the whole buildup of all of the history. There was like build up, build up, build up, build up. And then once we hit episode 25, we got into the clash. I mean, most of us kind of know a little bit of history at least. So you get to that last one, and then he's like, all right, now all of this is the foundation for relevance realization. And then and like we even like had the image of the guy sliding down Falkland Hill, like I'm just sliding on my ass down Falkland Hill. It's quite a pace. And we're just like, I don't know what's happening. My brain doesn't work anymore. And then you get this
landslide.
base. Then you get a
Hmm.
base, and we actually even we wouldn't know it like going through the videos now, but there was this huge gap in December where I you were traveling. December's just a crazy month anyway. And so that was me catching back up on editing because my brain couldn't even handle the processing power that it took to get through a single episode of editing. So now we're back on a pretty regular schedule because I do feel like it's now leveled out into this interesting plateau where there's a lot of spaces to still explore, but it has actually leveled out to now being manageable. I'm no longer like trying to climb straight up a 45-degree angle. It's at least the landscape has now flattened a little bit and I can at least get somewhere into it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a very good explanation of how it feels indeed. It feels like, okay, we're somehow back on at least partially solid ground. It's like, or indeed on that we were part of that, we felt that sliding, and now we're at the bottom, and now we can walk here and like let the grains of sand fall and see what comes next. But now we stopped sliding at least. Or at
Yeah.
least that's how it feels. I don't know. I don't
Well,
know.
and this is now where we see, I guess, where we bounced because he was talking about that whole the constraints of gravity and friction. Those were the constraints that were working at us as we were falling down Falkland Hill. And now those constraints are no longer with us. And the question is like, how far have we bounced from the mound? So I guess we'll get into that now with the centrality of relevance realization. So he starts this episode with the um, summary, and we're still working at this part, the inward raise into relevance realization, as we try to find the centrality of the argument for there being such a thing as relevance realization. Am I on the right track here?
Yes, yes, you are.
Okay.
Convergence argument.
There we
I'm
go.
facing back in my notes.
Lovely. Yep.
Yeah, and that's the part we're on. But I think we finalize that today, and next week we're going into the elegance,
Excellent.
like what flows from it.
Ooh. So these are all essentially like he's just building argument after argument, and he is not saying that there is anything that's being proven, anything conclusive, but he is saying that it's plausible. We're building these plausible arguments based on plausible, conclusions from research that's being conducted. And this episode is just a number of experiments that people have conducted in order to find this convergence. How we're like there is maybe a through line for
Mhm.
relevance realization, for consciousness, for insight, like going all the way back to episode 10, going back all the way back to episode 1, and finding ways in which there is actually maybe a way that someone could argue scientifically for relevance realization. And yeah, it's just like, whoa, the biggest buildup of my life. I've, not watched a series before that had this kind of cliffhanger or this kind of callback or this kind of foreshadowing. So well written. I think John definitely needs to go into episodes and sitcoms next venture. It's a lot more lucrative.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I said it before. The way he just structures the series is just perfect. You see the whole in the parts and the parts in the whole. It's just amazing. It's very platonic. Yeah, he's trying to give a naturalistic account. That's his big thing because he sees himself as a naturalistic something. Um, so he wants to, explain and understand the world in a naturalistic way. And that's why he would love to also his darling relevance realization to be able to explain and understand that in a naturalistic way. So
Yeah.
that's what's not
And
just scientific, but that specific way of science.
a naturalistic account for that specific way of relevance realization, and then also how that relates to human spirituality. Like
Yes.
why do we do this weird thing where we go to like rocks and say, oh, I'm bringing you some pumpkins, please make the rain come, or whatever. The we what are those things called? Like, I mean, it is rituals that people do before a football game or something like that, where they just have to do it. It's like a compulsion to do the thing, otherwise the team's not going to win. Like, why do we have those? And it's not
Mhm.
just like that's an extreme example. There are just ways in which we operate that is very much like that.
Mhm.
And there's a reason for it. And this might actually be the reason for it. It's not just that, people are hysterical or, whatever. So I love it. I love that we're exploring this side of the consciousness that is often untouched, but often in that way taboo and sacred.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm. Mhm. Mhm.
all right. Now, so we're coming up with that naturalistic account, or we need a naturalistic account for relevance realization. And he says an example of a plausible naturalistic account of relevance realization we have in information processing, but what about in the brain? So in the last episode, he was saying he was talking about information processing. And now, in terms of how is the brain a plausible naturalistic account, or how does it contain a naturalistic account of relevance realization? All right. So then he goes into this concept of scale invariant. He's like, I just want to first preface, right? Or what did you have about the brain?
Mhm. I just
That's
didn't
okay.
write those words down.
Okay. The process is happening at many levels of analysis. And that's that sensory motor loop of compression and particularization. So that's happening at multiple different levels. And he's saying that suggests that it could be implementing relevance realization.
So he's talking now about what happens in the brain. And in the brain, also this process indeed that we talked about in the past happened. That's what he's now talking about. And the common language that is referred to is firing and wiring. And that's pretty well known in like everybody kind of. So I've got Joe Dispenza's book with me again, because he's the first guy that because he uses the firing, like that which fires together wires together. He uses that to get people to change themselves by focusing on certain things during meditation and stuff. So it's very popular, that the whole saying, what fires together wires together, or the idea that that happens in the brain. It's like kind of like, yeah, people know that. So John's not too fond of the term, but it has a ring to it,
Yeah.
That's where I am.
And that's one aspect of relevance realization. It's kind of like, I guess, another system of opponent processing.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And
Yeah, the self-organizing criticality is an opponent processing, thing, kind of.
motor, motor.
Yeah, because it's
Yeah.
the compression and the particularization. So it's like kind of opponent
Oh,
processing.
yeah. He says it's a particular kind of opponent processing, self-organizing.
Yeah.
The self-organizing criticality. So that's what
Yeah.
this is the work of Per Bach talking about grains of sand.
Mhm. Which is
And
really important.
yeah. So when I guess in the case of an hourglass, we'll say, just like
Yeah.
conceptually thinking, the example of an hourglass, and if you turn it over and the grains of sand start dropping, it's kind of random because they hit the bottom of the glass and they bounce. And so it's not that they're hitting one spot, but at some point they start to form this mound.
Mm.
The grains of sand organize into a mound with these constraints of gravity and friction. The variation is in the bounce of the grains of sand as they hit that mound. Where do they bounce to? But for the most part, yeah, then they get into that mound. At some critical phase, then order breaks down and there's this avalanche. And then you get this new base, this new plateau that's much bigger. And therefore, it can go much higher.
Mhm. Mhm. Yes. So a couple of things one thing that jumped out at me when he was speaking, what I thought was really cool, and I imagine he mentions it, he means it differently from what I'm taking it, but he said they fall randomly, and then he corrected himself and said, well, random from our point of view, and I thought like, oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
That says so much.
Yeah.
Random from our point of view, that says so
Mm-hmm.
much. And so that's the one thing. And then the other thing, I mean, this puts the whole rock pool moment in a very different context, right? This is like, okay, you're just experiencing a landslide, but you could, okay, he also says like, okay, the self-organizing criticality can reach a level where it just falls apart and everything just falls apart, and that's it. That's the collapse of society or whatever. But it could be that a new base is formed, and then you get to build higher. So that is the potential of rock pool moments.
Mm-hmm. and
It
and then
could,
he yeah, because what you're saying is like he even said that it further the criticality in you can overwhelm the system and then you die. So like
yeah,
there's that can happen inside of you too, but there's
yeah,
that other alternative of maybe you just get stronger, maybe there's just a
yeah,
stronger base from which you can operate from.
yeah, yeah. Because that you dying, that's the body, but that's the whole thing. He talk constantly saying, remember, it happens in different levels. Everything happens in levels. It happens in the body. It happens in the mind. It happens like in life, in your home and in your work situation. Everything is like all these levels in the brain.
Mm-hmm.
It's happening, this restructuring type of thing constantly. So yeah, that's the beauty of it. It's like we're like this whole ecosystem unto ourselves. It's just beautiful.
Yeah.
And sometimes an ecosystem collapses, and sometimes it evolves.
Yep. Yeah. And so he says, yes, like you just said, that we see the brain cycling in that same kind of way where the neurons structure together. That's that mound forming. So the neurons coming together, then they go asynchronous, which is the neural avalanche, and then they reconfigure into a new synchrony, and then they go into asynchrony again. He says the brain is oscillating, it's doing relevance realization. And so it's doing data compression, and then a neural avalanche opens up variation into the system, which allows a new structure to reconfigure. That is momentarily fitted to the situation, and then it breaks up moment by moment. It's evolving its sensory motor fittedness to complexifying its structural functional organization. Wow.
Yes, it's gorgeous. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. And then there's evidence to support that the brain is doing relevance realization. So he mentions Thatcher et al. And right after he does that, he says that relevance realization, I think this is John's argument that he's making in this, that relevance realization can be implemented by this self-organizing criticality. So maybe we should take a moment to say why did they have to use a word like self-organizing criticality. It just sounds so dense and
But not really if you break it
okay.
up. Okay, so
Okay.
the main thing is it's self-organizing. It's organizing. So it, because he talked about like there does form some sort of organization when the sand falls on each other, because this is the process of the sand falling. So they, like later when he talks about the neural networks and all the paths and the small, but let's not get the two confused, although they are linked. But so there is organization in it, but there's not an telos, so an external purpose organizing it, and it's not a hand from outside organizing it. It's self-organizing, and that's very important that it happens within itself. It's, yeah. And then criticality is this critical moment, the kairos moment, which is also very important to mention. It's that critical one grain of sand slides a bit to the left, and then the whole leap tumbles down. So it's that, that critical moment, that moment that changes everything. So self-organizing criticality is actually, all three words are needed to really
Yeah.
get the what is happening here.
Well, I would
So,
like self-organizing kairos a little better, but
but we love kairos. and, and that would actually make it more difficult, because then you're bringing a Greek term, which, you know,
we don't want to do that. Sorry.
plus kairos also seems like you're getting it right. Like criticality is like it can go either way. In
True.
my mind, at least, it feels
Okay.
like a crisis is also, an opportunity, but it can also go either way.
Yeah.
I think the etymology of crisis is something about an opportunity. So it's
Mm.
that critical crisis moment, which is then. So,
Hmm. Interesting.
and if you say kairos, you just spoil the whole, you give it all away, and you don't want to keep some secrets.
All right. Fine. Okay. All right. So the argument this time then is that relevance realization can be implemented by the self-organizing criticality. The last time he talked about how relevance realization is general intelligence. It was the thing in our notes that we could confirm we both got out of that episode verbatim. Those are the exact words. And he confirmed it here. We can say it without a doubt. Relevance realization is general intelligence. As far as the last argument is concerned, we are not saying that that is true. It's just that he, in fact, was making that argument and we were
Did he
not
equate
wrong.
it? Because I even now I wasn't sure. Like that's the beauty of you getting to getting to audit these things of us or work on it, because you now remember what we talked about. For me, it feels like I haven't talked about the meaning crisis at all in my entire life. It's like all of this is new. The books I have in front of me is books that I read like on my own years ago. So at a certain point, he talks about how the brain is awesome, but we shouldn't make it all about the brain. This is a Dutch, yeah, it's a very, this is our most famous neuroscientist. So I'm going to translate it. It says, "We are our brain." So he makes everything about the brain. Like, and that is what John says in this episode. We shouldn't do that. So I just want to illustrate there are really important neuroscientists who does actually do that.
Okay.
So yeah, but maybe that's why I grabbed to like books from my past. Like it's
Yeah.
just I just need a hold on. So I'm saying I feel like I'm walking on a plateau, but not really.
This is
Yeah.
exactly where we need to be. Because, yes, last time we were questioning, we were like, I don't know. I don't feel very comfortable saying that John's definitely making this argument. But we were both like, but I wrote it down as RR equals GI.
Okay, because I wrote here there's a deep connection and it can be integrated or should be integrated, but I'm still not sure if it should be equated. But you say you did here. Yes, it is. Cool. I'm gonna trust you.
Also, I will say that he is not asserting that this is true. It's just his argument. So we want to be
Okay.
very clear that it doesn't mean that relevance realization is general intelligence. That John's making that argument here based
Uh-huh.
on evidence that we're going to explore as we talk about Thatcher et al.
What did they say?
So Thatcher et al. Ongoing, he says. A strong relationship between measures of self-organization and how intelligent you are. The more flexibility there is in the opponent processing, the more intelligent you are. And he's talking about between that synchrony and asynchrony that we were just talking about on the last part.
Yeah. Yeah. So what I understand from that, then the quicker your brain can restructure itself after falling apart, the more intelligent you are. No, I shouldn't use the word smart because it's about intelligence, not having the smarts. Um, is that my understanding
I think you're
correct?
right. Yeah. Like the quicker the reconstruction can happen after the avalanche. And I would suspect maybe even the less the destruction of the avalanche. Doesn't it seem, I don't know that this is true, it'd be something worth testing, that the bigger the mound, the less no, the more
I'm listening.
catastrophic. Well, because I'm still sorting it in my head. I'm just gonna say something, and it might not be true.
Mhm,
The bigger the mound, the less catastrophic the destruction of the avalanche. The bigger the mound, less.
mhm. Yeah, I'm seeing images now, and one thing I'm seeing is a mound with a hole in the middle, and that's going to be super destructive if that avalanche starts. It's all going to tumble in. But if you have a really well built base, and then indeed the little avalanches at the top is not going to change so much. Um, but the problem is you do want that every now and then. You do want that
Yeah.
complete shift of perspective.
And it does
Um,
happen. Like, because I'm
yeah,
thinking about it, and it's like it does. It's not so bad. It's like, oh, whoops, whoops, and then like one point you do get to this now is way too peaked. It's way too high of a
yeah,
point, and
yeah,
then something hits this, and then it just all the whole top is just gonna
yeah,
fall to the sides. So it doesn't, it's not, that's the thing, is like it's never consistent either what's going to
yeah,
happen with the mound. It's not like
yeah,
every mound operates the same way, just like no problem is the same as the last problem. Like your
yeah.
problem formulation, you're
Mm,
coming to a problem differently every time because
mm,
every time the mound is different. So
mm.
yeah.
And I think that's maybe why you had struggled to formulate it, because it depends on the mount and it depends on the landslide. Because if it's just like a little landslide, yeah, the bigger the mount, the less But if it's like the whole freaking mountain is experiencing the landslide, then the bigger the mountain, man, there's going to be an earthquake, you know? So
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
it's very relative.
Yeah. So it's different from what you were saying, which is just that flexibility. So it
Mm,
may be that you break down, but can you build back up
yeah,
and at all? Or does it
yeah.
kind of just stay out? Yeah, flat, whatever.
Okay, let's go back to the neuro avalanches. So this is how I'm seeing it now. So he talks about how in your brain something happens and then the neurons just stops firing together,
Yeah.
and then they reconstruct each other, and oops, they start a new network and they're firing together again. And I think that's what intelligence is, and because that's why he said it can be measured. You can put someone in a scan and you can see the neurons firing and wiring in the scan, and
Mm-hmm.
it's that little thing in your brain that happens. It's not necessarily how quickly you adapt to life, but it's like how quickly your neurons fire and wire together after they've been like um, shown a picture that's he uses the example of a picture that's like what the fuck, and then your mind makes sense of it. Like the
Mm-hmm.
quicker that happens, like
Yeah.
because that what the fuck is an avalanche, a little avalanche, and then like oh restructuring it into oh now I can make sense of it. That is it, adapting to what it's seeing and making sense of it.
Yeah.
So I
Yeah.
think that's what then measures intelligence, like the firing of the neurons, how quickly that happens.
Yeah, and that's actually the next one that he's mentioning because that was Hess and Gross doing follow-up research on what we were talking about with the Thatcher research. So Thatcher was doing that how intelligent you are, that there's a strong relationship between general intelligence and that self-organizing criticality. And then in order to follow up on that research, Hess and Gross come in and they do a comprehensive review, and he says it's a good case that it's highly plausible that the self-organizing criticality is functional in the brain in a fundamental way. Yeah, so I think that that's Hess and Gross and their follow-up research. He
Yeah.
says two oh 2014. I could not read my handwriting. 2014 they did a comprehensive review of Thatcher's, but he does preface by saying that if their research is right, then it has important implications because it allows us to move from a psychometric measure to a direct measure of relevance realization, consciousness. We're going to get to in a minute, right? And that might help us to develop artificial general intelligence, which, by the way, we should mention that at the time of this recording, the series is 4 years old. So I'm sure it did actually have some sort of impact on AGI because we are talking to Chat GPT and all of these other, advancements in AGI. So I imagine that this had a lot of
Well,
influence on that.
something happened. Something happened in the meantime with the AI in the AI world. Well, I think those two are kind of separate. Like the measuring, it's like in the past we also talked about it. There are people who like to measure intelligence, and then there are people who like to build intelligence. And this, if we can actually map the intelligence via brain scans, then gives us a different way to measure, and also then we can see oh what happens in the brain. Maybe we can make that happen in something artificial, and then hence create general artificial intelligence. And I'm so curious about what happened to this research indeed afterwards. I think.
There was a point in this. I wrote down the minute, and we haven't gotten to it yet. At the 29-minute mark, I felt pretty. It felt pretty scary. I was like, what is he about to tell me now? Because you realize how much people don't pay attention to stuff when this kinds of insights come in, and you're just like, wait, this is out there, and people know about this, and nothing's being said. And again, it's been 4 years now since he's talked about this research.
Yeah,
And meanwhile, it's been longer since the research was actually
yeah,
conducted. And he was all like, this is on the cutting edge. This is all brand new. And here we are 4 years later, but a whole pandemic later, by the way.
Yeah,
It's not just
like
that it was
so
random
much.
times. Yeah. This was actually a very
Rich for
research
years.
driven 4 years that was rich. Yeah.
It was a chaotic 4 years.
I
That's for
think we
sure.
could say that. Yeah. Yeah. I think we could say that. So for the types of advancements that have happened in artificial general intelligence since the time of this recording for him is huge, huge quantum
Mhm,
leaps in AGI for sure.
mhm.
So, all right. We're talking about the graph theory, I think. I'm going to edit that out if that's not true. But there's he's saying another scale of invariant naturalistic account of how neurons are wiring into networks. So we just talked about firing in the beginning. This is about wiring. And
Yes.
so there are three kinds of networks that
Yeah.
he's mentioning in this.
And he points out these networks are everywhere. It's not just in the brain, but they're also in the brain. Again, that level thing. It's everywhere throughout being, these
Mm.
networks. So, yeah.
So yeah, it's pretty abstract, basically. Like to conceptualize this, you probably want to pick one thing, apply it to that, and then once you've got it conceptually mapped, then you can apply it to something else.
Yes.
So just yeah, put it to one thing. Just think of your friends at first, or think of whatever.
Your
All right,
brain.
your brain, neural networks in the brain.
Yeah.
So they can be three different ways that they've listed here, which is regular. That means that each node is connected to the next node and it's redundant. There's a double connection between each of the nodes. They're sending out. And what I saw when I looked at these when he was drawing them was organic chemistry. He was just drawing molecules and how they have that double bond or single bond. So there's redundancy in the double bond. There's redundancy here. It's inefficient. It's resilient, but it's inefficient.
Mhm.
And that's how this scale is working. We're on the scale of efficient to resilient. So
Yes.
where it is very resilient, it is not very efficient at all.
Mm-mm.
On the efficient end, we'll just skip over to the other extreme, is he calls it random network, which is very efficient. It's just shooting stuff off node to node, long distance calls, doesn't matter. It's going all the way and there's no order to it. He's like, this looks like a mess, but it's
Mhm,
highly efficient. Um, what it is in efficiency, it lacks in resiliency. It is not resilient.
mhm.
And then in between, that Goldilocks network is called the small world network. It's a small world after all.
I must say that quite for a while, I could not actually focus on the lecture because my mind was singing that song. Shut up, shut up.
Have you ever been on the ride in Disney World?
No, I've never
Okay.
been to Disney, either one, Paris or yours. I
Okay,
haven't
okay.
been there. Mm,
Well, I've been to ours 3 times in Florida, and
cool.
that ride I've been on every single time, and it is something that will get stuck in your head for the rest of the time that you're at the park. And it is actually a rather long ride compared to the rest of the rides too, because you're just kind of floating in a boat, and every country is represented. I think within reason, we'll say. I don't think they actually have representation from every country. So anyway, the small world is holding both. It says these networks are being constrained in the trade off of the bioeconomies of efficiency and resiliency, but the small world gets the optimal amount of both efficiency and resiliency.
Mhm, mhm. So that's the ideal state too, that our brains naturally seem to fall to.
Yeah, that's interesting. Like our brains somehow choose the most, or I guess it doesn't necessarily have to. The brain kind of has this option of the most efficient or the most resilient or the most optimal.
Mhm, mhm.
And it gravitates towards, maybe if trained towards small world networks.
I think that's the natural thing. I think we evolved to do that. I don't think we need to be trained to do that. I think when I'm now thinking of different things that could go wrong in brain, different things that we see that might actually be people who are stuck, whose brain have difficulty moving from a regular structure that's very structured, for instance, but then not very efficient at all, but you know, or very random, very chaotic, not very resilient, though. It's and then the optimal is like the normal like
Yeah.
thing that most the general public tends toward that. And it's probably just easier for every human being who has this structure than it is for those who don't have it.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, when you talk about it, because we there's many different levels that this can happen on. When you talk about it, I can zoom out to that being obviously like conservative versus progressive,
Hmm.
and
Hmm.
the resiliency in the conservative traditional
Hmm.
routines,
Hmm.
rituals, and then the progressive would be the efficient and
Hmm.
getting us to change, and so that's very efficient in
Hmm.
being adaptable and fitted to a new
Hmm.
environment. If the environment's changing, then I got to change, and the environment's changing very quickly, and so you
Hmm.
can see that where those both of those mental models
Hmm.
can originate from.
Hmm. I'm thinking artists and accountants, for instance. It's the same. You also probably get people who lean not only politically but also in the work they choose. They lean towards one thing, and um, yeah, it's yeah, it's all over the place
Mm,
on
very
all levels.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, well, if the brain is doing relevance realization by trading between efficiency and resiliency, it tends to develop and generate small world networks. And the small world networks are going to be associated with the highest functionality in your brain. That's interesting because he did mention too this experiment that we're going to get into about the consciousness and going in and out of consciousness and how it switches to the lower.
That was
uh,
really interesting.
I like that. So just keep that in mind with the small world networks are going to be associated with the highest functioning in your brain. So then that's that connection between small world networks and intelligence.
Yeah.
It's connected to the higher functions of the brain.
Yeah. Your brain is functioning optimally at its highest. I think that's how I interpret it.
So the evidence this is the case is Langer et al. In 2012. They did a similar thing to Thatcher. So Thatcher was working with the uh, self-organizing criticality. And then we have Langer, which is talking about small world networks. The more your brain is wired like small world networks, and remember that's the highest functionality of your brain, the better your intelligence. Whoa.
And then I have the structure that he drew on the board. I kind of have that here. All the things coming into relevance, realization, the naturalistic explanation that he's offering here, which is awesome. And then how that relates to firing and wiring. And the firing and wiring relates to your general intelligence, your consciousness, and your relevance. And consciousness the function of consciousness is relevance realization. Um, and our consciousness and your global workspace, the global workspace theory interrelate, and then the working memory is all under that there. And working memory relates to your general intelligence, and working memory relates to relevance realization. And it's this whole structure. And at a certain point, he looked a little bit like a mad scientist with all that structures on the board, and he was so enthusiastic. And I adore him. Everybody knows I adore him. So I say that with all the love that one can feel. And I sat there like, oh, that's so cute. But it's so, you know, he speaks of and this because he says, so when we have this and then when we have this, and I'm like, oh John, no, nobody understands all that, and nobody understands all. It's so sweet of you to think that we do, but but you can see he has a very good overview of everything that
Yeah.
he drew on the board,
Yeah.
and he did his best so that we can also have, and maybe when we go through this again, we will understand it better. But it was, and I feel I do understand it better now than I did previously. Like, it's so much, and then he refers to it like, although he kept saying it's cutting edge science,
Yeah.
and no one really thinks that anyone thinks that cutting edge science is simple, or that everyone understands it like
Right.
that, or have a good overview. But
Yeah.
it was I think if we can sit in front of that board that he drew in this episode and just stare at it and talk at all the terms that's written on the board, I think there will be like at least 5 aha moments that we go through. So
Continuously. Yeah. Yep.
continuously, indeed.
Yep.
It's like reading Plato. Every time you come back to it, you discover something new and have a new insight.
Mm. That because so in the last episode he was saying like, or I guess it could even be recall from much earlier that um there was this focus on the artificial intelligence and its neural networks or artificial networks, I guess. So he's saying the design arguments were coming out of AI. And now neuroscience has these arguments. A couple of other experiments that he mentions is Langer et al. Separately in 2013 uh, found or argue that extra task demands on working memory become even more organized, like a small world network. Hilder et al. Has a specific kind of small world network with efficient hubs and intelligent brain nodal efficiency of hub regions in the salience network are correlated with general intelligence. So let's break down what that means. These small world networks form, and um, a higher occurrence of these small world networks means that we're more intelligent because our working memory becomes more organized like small world networks. Yeah, it's just like overall, your brain just starts functioning more like a small world network if you have more small world networks operating in your brain, which are self organizing criticalities. It's amazing. It's amazing. The
Mm.
the the holograms, the parts of the whole, everything operating okay. Oh, okay. Like it's almost like all the little networks like get this idea like maybe we should start functioning like that. Like the small world over there. They got a small world going on. I said this is at minute 29. This was when I started to get concerned. I was like,
Okay.
wow,
Yeah.
we are on the precipice of something big because he says
Yeah.
this is not only a naturalistic account of general intelligence, it may actually point to a naturalistic account of some of the phenomenology of consciousness.
Mm.
We're like getting into God territory.
Yep.
Let me just get us back into the episode instead of my fucking meltdown.
No, it's a very, very interesting path to go down. I just don't know how to go down it. That's why I'm silent.
Okay.
Do you mean then, like, okay, so we can create consciousness?
I think we can see here there is evidence for how consciousness is self organizing.
Mm.
Where the fuck does resiliency and efficiency come from? This is the chicken and egg question, right? So, where is the instance of efficiency and resiliency needed where there is life, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Because it's self.
Well, later he speaks of where it is when he says, like, I need to make a few closing comments
Yeah. Yeah.
where the organism that self-regulates or self cares
Why it
about its
cares.
preservation.
It cares because it matters, but it chooses what matters.
It cares, and what makes it survive is what matters. What, helps it continue being is what matters, because I think the fundamental caring is to be. If you look at any type of organism, they will flee from what is harmful and move towards what can feed them or procreate, or so. And then that optimal grip, because this resiliency efficiency trade-off is about getting the optimal grip, like on being, like how should I be to be best fitted in this environment, that I am resilient
Mm-hmm.
as much as I need to be, but also efficient as much as I need to be. And that feels like a survival instinct. And then that would mean that there's something survival instincty about consciousness.
Yeah.
Your argument?
Well, then there's something survival instincty about God.
Ha! But that is if you equate God with consciousness. And can you do that?
That's what he's saying about human spirituality. The reason for there being a God. He's not making an argument
No,
for
no.
God.
No, yeah, human spirituality, but John will never say God.
I know, I
He's
know.
non-theistic.
Okay, that's fine. That's okay. Let's just
Mm.
put that in a corner. Let's just set that aside. He's non-theistic. Okay. Remember how he said at the beginning that there was something we said in the beginning that even if people don't believe it, it doesn't matter.
Oh yes, but that was before we recorded.
Oh, what? Oh, what was it? What was it?
It was me talking about the gods.
Okay.
um,
Go ahead, please finish the sentence.
but we're talking about, I mean, if that's your argument, yes, by all means make your argument. But we can't claim that John is making
I
that
know, I know, I know.
argument. That's the only thing I'm saying.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. This is
Yeah.
exploratory. We're going
Yes.
into the cave here. This
Yes.
is not.
Yeah. I was saying, I get really pissed off at the postmodern idea that, oh, well, if you believe in God, then he's real for you. And if you don't believe in God, then he's not real for you. That's like, no, it's either it's a metaphysical reality, whether God is or is not, you know, as
Mhm,
so either I can be wrong or I can be right
mhm,
in my belief.
mhm.
But I don't know about if that's true anymore. Because what if we can create gods by believing in them? And
If they're
so
relevant.
if they're
That's why
relevant,
there's,
yeah.
well, if there's a relevant God, right?
Well, Heidegger said only God can save us now. So I would say it's pretty relevant.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm reading Plotinus, and maybe this is a good time to mention it.
Yeah.
I was thinking, I'm struggling, but I don't read for information. I read for transformation. Normally, when I read, like I'm reading Plotinus, I'm reading him religiously in the strictest sense of the word. It's complete transformation. And John loves Plotinus, but he disagrees with him. I do not have John's critical abilities. I cannot disagree with Plotinus. So I'm going through an extremely weird phase. I'm assimilating everything Plotinus says. And Plotinus believes some crazy shit. So I'm starting to believe some crazy shit. And I'm not sure I enjoy it,
Yeah.
but I have to go with it. That's just the way I
Yeah.
read. I
Yeah.
need to absorb Plotinus. And so if I start believing in the gods, so be it. What's not so nice, I did a meditation with Rick yesterday where he did a very intense body scan, and I started almost feeling nauseated by my body, which is maybe also an effect of Plotinus, that whole the body is bad, the intellect is good type of thing. Although he's not always saying that, but
Mhm.
so it's not always pleasant what I'm transforming into,
Yeah.
but I know I will get through it. But I have to go through it
Yeah.
before
It's
I. It's
the build.
John. Yeah, exactly. John does recommend people not to read Plotinus. I should also say that, but I'm a very bad girl, so I'm reading
Yes, you
Plotinus.
are. Well, I would like to maybe, I don't know, invite you to record what you gather from it, even if it's not you reading it, just like a quick summary every time, and just because then you can revisit it and you can like be, like on that day when I read that, and then you can have like a synopsis or you just like describing it, because I think that would be really cool to have a log of, like, because you're not going to stay that state.
No.
You know that you do these things, you commit yourself to something, and then it's gone, or the rug pull happens, the avalanche, collapses. But what I see has been the small avalanches, like we were talking about, how the big mound has had a lot of small avalanches, and there probably will be that big one that's going to be like, okay, that's no longer the center of my view. And it would be nice to have a catalog of all of those iterations of Plotinus and just
Yeah.
the wrestling that
Yeah.
you had with that mindset.
I am writing about it. Not regularly, but I'm planning to go through Plotinus a couple of times still. So I'm only reading for him the second time now. So by the third time that I'm going through him, there will be more clear things. But I wrote what I wrote was because Jordan has this whole wrestle with God thing.
Yeah.
And I wrote like, I'm not wrestling with God, I'm wrestling with Plotinus.
That's
It's
so
like
cute.
it's like, but it feels like the same thing because
Yeah.
but it's pretty cool. So some of the things that I'm starting to believe.
I like it. Hey, I'm on board for it because you know how I feel.
He's totally into astrology. Well, he's very knowledgeable about astrology, but he has a particular take.
I think
And
it was
like
a
the
similar thing to like how we have, and I'm not equating here. Please do not think I'm equating, but the theory of gravity or something like that. Like they had something established and they were like, this is it. Astrology is it. Yo, this is how it works. And that
um,
geocentric model. And I
mhm,
think that they were all just kind of on board with that. And so
mhm,
anybody that was, it was, and this is why I have an issue with like following the lineage of my predecessors in biology or anything. I didn't do those experiments. Therefore, how do I know every single one of them is actually contributing to a true narrative? Or what if it's all fucking false? Like, we don't really know that that's, how space time works based on Einstein's theories or who the fuck ever, Isaac Newton, whatever. So whoever's wrong was wrong. And that changed everything. And so, in the same way, I think like there was like that whole model that a lot of scientists were following. So
yeah.
if it doesn't, you shouldn't discredit him for having any affiliation with astrology. Is all I'm saying.
No, I'm not. But
I know
that
you're
sounds
not.
exactly when I'm reading him and his knowledge about it, it sounds exactly right. Indeed, like he writes like like all scientists of my day knows this. Like
This
this
is
is how the
obvious.
world
Yeah.
works. But you shouldn't place too much emphasis on that because you shouldn't only blame the stars. You also have some influence, or some say you should also take some responsibility. That's basically what he's saying.
I see.
Like,
Cool.
yeah,
Very cool. Okay, how did we get there? You were talking about him.
gods. We were talking about
Gods.
gods,
Yeah, I told you to tell me, okay,
consciousness, and gods.
consciousness, and equating that to, okay, so if we've found now a phenomenological reason for of consciousness, then have we found some of the phenomenological naturalistic account of God? That's what it was. May point to a naturalistic account of some of the phenomenology of consciousness. Therefore, then couldn't this be a naturalistic account of not just a general intelligence, but also the naturalistic account of the phenomenology of the consciousness, of consciousness? So anyway, I was just like, this was like where he was like hitting into God territory, because it started out we were just looking at relevance and how do we find relevance, and then it became, well, how did humans come up with spirituality? Why was that relevant at all? Was that ever a thing?
Mm,
And
mm.
so, yeah.
Next week we will look into that. And we're going to look at Wonder. The book that I need to read about is just called Wonder.
All right, let's get back into it. We're going to enter back in through episode 10 when we were talking about the global workspace theory. And he starts drawing all those lines to everything. But mainly how global workspace theory can be connected to working memory and how working memory remember we talked about in episode 28 with Lynn Hasher how working memory is related to relevance realization. Don't worry, I'm going to get us there. Consciousness is related to self-organizing criticality. Cosmelli et al. In 2004 had a binocular rivalry experiment. So the binocular rivalry experiment is how we are going to relate consciousness with the self-organizing criticality. Those are the levels that we're relating here because remind you, we've been through levels of opponent processing. That's that sensory motor loop. The opponent processing gives us the self-organizing criticality through relevance realization. And then we can go up to the next level, which is
Why do
small
you
world.
why do you say through relevance realization?
Um, self-organizing criticality. Um, hold on. Because it's a particular kind of opponent processing.
Mm-hmm.
I guess they're all using relevance realization at every level, but
Maybe the restructuring uses relevance realization. It falls
yeah,
apart, and then to restructure, there's some sort of relevance realization happening.
yeah, yeah. Huh.
There was a lot
Oh,
in this
one,
episode that, so
yeah.
that's why I'm
No,
asking.
that's a good, I like it because he said in the beginning that one aspect, just one aspect of relevance realization is the opponent processing.
Okay.
So actually, I think I did misspeak. And so compression and that particularization, the neurons that are synchrony and asynchrony, that's just
Hmm.
one aspect of relevance realization, is what he's saying.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense to me. That makes sense.
Okay. So it suggests that these things on these levels could be implementing relevance realization, is what he says. He says the process, this scale invariant, the process happening at many levels of analysis, it suggests it could be implementing relevance realization.
Mm,
The brain.
mm.
The brain could be implementing relevance realization. All right. So, and the brain is oscillating, doing that relevance realization
Mm.
with the
So what I'm
neurons.
seeing what I'm seeing when you say that, I'm seeing that brain in being taking pictures of that, then they show them a picture that they don't understand what it is, and then all of a sudden it understands what it is, and so it now can see how, what it is, so it can kind
Mm-hmm.
of, there's some sort of relevance realization going on there. It's like
Mm-hmm.
figure, because you need to know what something is in order to know it's relevant. I don't know, in my
Yes,
mind it
yes,
makes sense,
yes, it does.
but
And because relevance realization is general intelligence.
mhm.
So we should see a general relationship between general intelligence and, fuck, it's not small, self-organizing criticality. The
Yeah,
general intelligence, there's a relationship between general intelligence and self-organizing criticality, and general
yeah.
intelligence is relevance realization. So there's a relationship between relevance realization and self-organizing criticality. That's one level.
Self-organization, organizing criticality, and small work networks is kind of like two things that play in on each other on the same level. That's how I understand it. It's like it happens kind of at the same time, like, of potentially, like when something falls and it reorganizes itself, it potentially reorganizes itself in a small world network. That's how I see it. It's like
Yeah.
two kind of theories that really overlap well, but it's not one flowing from the other. It's just
Right.
that they're they kind of saying the same thing but differently,
Yeah.
very differently. But it's
See, I kept writing down RR equals little g equals SWN, RR equals SOC little g. So it's like What that means
Yeah.
is relevance realization is equal to general intelligence is equal to small world networks is equal to
Yeah.
self-organizing
Yeah.
criticality, but
Yeah.
that different
Yeah.
level. So it's hard to say because you can't equivocate. So you can't
Yeah.
like collapse them down on one another. They still have their own level at which they operate, but they're doing the same function of relevance or one aspect of relevance realization.
See, that's why I wrote the words like that,
Oh.
as I mentioned, deep connection, and it's integrated. There's a deep connection between all of these things, and it's
Yeah.
integrated together.
Yeah.
But and that instead of equating them, that's how you
There,
should see it. It's like this whole. When you look at it from one lens, you see small world networks.
yep.
If you look at it from the other side, you see self-organizing criticality.
Mm-hmm.
That that's how I see it. It depends
Yeah.
on which lens you look at it, and you look at something from this side, it's general intelligence. You look at it from this side, it's relevance realization.
No,
That's
that's where
no.
I'm going to draw the line. That's where we got to draw
Okay.
the line. He's he's saying that relevance realization contains all of those things. Those are all aspects of relevance realization. He's
Okay.
saying that relevance realization is the thing, that those are
Okay.
all aspects of. So you've got because it all came together while you were talking, and then that's where would because I was gonna let you finish, but I
Yeah.
was like, nope, I gotta draw the line there. So relevance
Yeah.
realization
Thank
is the
you.
top of all of this, and then
Hmm.
you've got small world networks, you've got self-organizing criticality, you've got all of these things that are just, and that's why we were getting confused because I was writing equals. General
Mm.
intelligence is just just an aspect of relevance realization, or maybe he's equating them. I don't know. I think we're kind of
Those
like
two,
wishy-washy.
those two can be equated, but I think small world
Maybe,
networks
yeah.
and the
Self-organizing
self,
criticality.
yeah, they're aspects of relevance realization.
Let's
I
go with
think
that
that
for
is correct.
now. And then we'll
Yeah.
say that general intelligence is equal to relevance realization. And both of those can be made up of all of these aspects, which include
Yeah.
self-organizing, criticality, and small world networks. Okay.
Yeah.
General intelligence equals relevance realization is the argument that we're making. And we've got all of these things. Now, this next one that we're going to talk about is consciousness related to the self-organizing criticality. All right. So Cosmelli, which I love that name, Cosmelli et al. In 2004 has this binocular rivalry experiment. There's a triangle, and a cross. It's just can't not. All right.
We have to. It's the law.
One one point of brain into synchrony. Oh, okay. So basically the experiment is designed in a way that you're looking at two different objects and your brain's kind of having because it's I guess a cross is set up in front of one of your eyes and maybe a triangle is set up in front of the other eye and so you're trying to focus and so your brain can produce one of the images but not both of them together. It's
Mhm.
like you can either see this or you can see this. You're not going to see both of them. And when you can see an image, just one or the other, when you can see an image, that's synchrony. That's the brain moving into synchrony. Anytime you're not seeing an actual image, it's moving between the two images, that's asynchrony. The brain's not really putting it together.
Mhm.
Right.
Mhm. Mhm.
Well, okay, so that's interesting. I actually wrote about recently. I was doing an experiment really similar where I was sitting on a condo balcony and between the balusters, I was looking at the horizon of the water, and I would focus in between the balusters and look at the water, but then I could focus back out and zoom to the whole balcony and see. And it was interesting because I was kind of relating it to paths that you can take in life. And so I would look between the balusters at one point and was like, okay, that's the path. That's what we're going down. And interestingly enough, all of the other balusters would disappear. I would no
Mm.
longer see the rest of them. It almost looked like this
Mm.
landscape was now just the horizon of water. And it was because my eyes were zooming into that, and so my mind was constructing the rest of the horizon being nothing but water. It was so
Mm.
bizarre. And then when I zoomed back out, I could see all the balusters again, and but they would disappear,
Mm.
legitimately disappear from my visual field. I could no longer see them anymore, and it was all an optical illusion. But it's really interesting
You got to choose
perspective.
what to see. Mm. I wonder how much influence we have on that, though. If it's really a choice, or if it's our brain like deciding.
You know what's interesting, and you can see it too when he draws that cube on the
Mhm.
board.
Oh, I
Is it
struggle with that. Oh,
well,
always.
where is the struggle though? The struggle is in switching. It's not
Hmm.
in choosing one.
No, once you see the other one, you see it. It's very obvious. As soon as you see, you see. But the switching is a struggle. Well, for me at least, it's a struggle. I can't switch that easily.
I think I think you could probably switch better than a lot of people though,
I don't know.
if you catch my drift. I think that
Yeah.
ability to switch between the cubes is um describing the flexibility of the brain to move from compression.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, but I get frustrated with myself if I don't do it like that.
I know. I know, me too. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, all right, all right. We're close to that insight. So hold on. Let's get into Monty et al. And the general anesthetic. We were talking about this earlier. You keep talking about the brain scans. They can see when neurons are
It's so
firing
cool.
together. So what he's saying is um during this experiment, what Monty et al. Was looking at was passing in and out of consciousness. And what they're arguing they've observed is that the brain loses the structure as small world networks and breaks down into more local networks as the brain loses consciousness and returns into consciousness. Those small world networks are constructed. What?
It's
What?
it's like switching off and switching on. And like when you switch off, it's just like, "Ugh."
Mm-hmm.
And then when you switch it on, it's like, oh, it's it's yeah, it's yeah, it's pretty amazing.
It does make me wonder in which of those models would we be in the unconscious state? Would it be that regular state or would it be random? Like, is it highly
I,
resilient or does it matter? No.
I think because it says it's more local network, so I think it's the very structured one.
Very resilient. Yeah.
Yeah,
But highly inefficient. So it's not getting
yeah,
much done. That makes sense.
which makes sense. Yeah, you're not, but the rest of your body is like healing itself and stuff while you're sleeping, and your brain takes a lot of energy when it's like small world networking. So it makes sense that they're like, oh, let's go to our efficient state, but not very resilient because we don't need to get a lot done now. The rest of the body needs some repair time.
This makes me think about the um healthcare system and how a lot of times people find their body can heal itself if they just take time to rest and eat
Mhm.
properly. And it's going back to the basics. And it's that very redundant model of healthcare that's like you eat 3 meals a day or whatever. But there's also in healthcare this model of experimentation and things that are more random, like
There was an ambulance.
I know. That's why I was like, I'm going to keep that in. I'm going to talk right through that. The random might be efficient because you can heal a case, with this random experimentation. Wow, we found the random answer. I mean, this really helps to like structure and model a lot of things because in healthcare, you need both. You
Hmm.
need
Hmm.
the holistic model of preventative healthcare, but you also benefit greatly from this allopathic care in experimenting with different types of substances that we can make out of random. He says random from our perspective. Haphazard, as my ecology professor would have forced me to say haphazardly, this haphazard model that's highly efficient. That's cool. I like that. Cool.
Yeah.
I mean, just like going through that, like in the mind, like conceptually, really does help to understand how it scales out to multiple levels of our
Mhm, mhm,
being and
mhm,
how
mhm.
it's informing. Well, if it works on that level, then maybe it could work on this level, and maybe it works really well on
Yeah.
this level. And
Yeah.
it's nice that that gives you a little bit of something to structure from. Like,
Yeah.
okay,
Yeah.
and then there's like he's giving us the words to describe what it is that I'm trying to say or structuring around because it's my brain's yeah broken when we get into the cog side.
No, it's not. It's entering new territory.
Yeah,
So it's still in that hazy phase, maybe,
right.
but it's gonna restructure itself into a small novel. With Ursula Goodenough, who wrote an amazing book on nature. I can't see it now, so I can't remember the Sacred Depths of Nature. Writes because it's about biology and just it's kind of like a daily meditation thing that you can go through. And she starts with like, maybe you don't have all this knowledge, but um, the way we learn is by building coat hangers, she calls it. So you get a little bit of knowledge, and the next time you get a coat, you can hang it, and then you remember it better. So every time you hear about these things or talk about these things, a little bit more can be hung on your shelf of you know hangers and stuff. And so we're still building coat hangers in cognitive science, and that's why it feels like a bit uh, challenging,
Yeah,
but that's normal.
yeah.
It would have been really weird if it wasn't like that.
So let's bring them together. Let's bring the coats and the hangers together because some of those hangers that we have are the intelligence that we talked about, general intelligence. We also have this coat hanger of consciousness that we talked about a while back. And now we have this new thing, but we'll get to it in a second because we also have a coat hanger of insight. In fact, all of this
Mm,
might fall on that one big coat hanger of insight because the dynamic process of self-organizing criticality also falls under that same umbrella. So let's just say that insight is that nice plastic wrap that you put around all your clothes, the wardrobe hanger. Is the case.
or inside as a body, because it's like, why do you need coat hangers? Why do you need clothes? So that you can put it on. And
Mm.
inside is that, it's like, it feels like that's why we're doing this, right? For the inside. What an insight is, like, before you have an insight, your entropy in your mind goes like, woo, it shuts up, because you have this disruptive. That's why when we talk about insight, we have this disruptive strategies. And so you have to, like, the entropy, the chaos goes up, and then at a certain point you have the insight, and then the organization drops even further. So it's like you're more grounded,
Mm-hmm.
or like, and that's what an insight is like.
Leveled
Better
out.
organization type of thing. So you become even better organized, better. I want to say more complexified, because complexification is actually what. And you mentioned earlier, he speaks of becoming more intelligent, and he said that. And when he said the word, I was like, what? Because intelligence is actually quite fixed, but we definitely become more complex. Our minds become more complex. And so I would rather say it like that, maybe.
Yeah.
Like, after an insight, our whole mind space becomes maybe a little bit more complex. And complexification is growth. It's becoming more whole.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and in fact, like it might be helpful to say capable, more capable of
Mm,
complexification. That way that just
yeah.
helps to understand how, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. All right. So that was that graph. And
Yeah.
basically like
So it's a self-organizing criticality. That's what it is. It's like the heap falls apart,
insight.
and then it's built up again.
Okay. All right. So then we've got an experiment by Schilling where the insight is how it's related to the um, small world networks. So that last one was about the self-organizing criticality, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And this Schilling experiment is insight to small world networks. He draws these diagrams of local organizations, and how they're like just little dots that are into a circle, and then how those are regular network. So he just drew those 6 dots that he had been drawing. Um, the local organizations can turn into a small world network with just one long distance network forming. So suddenly they lose a little bit of resiliency because one of those networks has now shot across to a node that it's not, you could say, adjacent to in his diagram. But there's a gain in efficiency because now this node can reach that node and it's much quicker. We lose resiliency, but gain efficiency in that regular network that becomes a small world network. So the insight changes that regular network to a small world
Mm-hmm.
network, and that's how it can scale up to that level. So it's more optimal. It's not, on either end of the resiliency or the efficiency. It's most optimal in the center there. That flash of salience, alteration of fittedness to the problem space.
I wrote a sudden enhancement of relevance realization, a flash optimization of fittedness to problem space. That's what I wrote. Flash of light, crash of drums, my golden coat flew out of sight.
Oh, interesting. Jackets.
Huh.
Okay. This is all stuff that makes this possible. And now it just shows how progressive the project is because all of the convergences. So all of that we just talked about is stuff that makes relevance realization or a theory for relevance realization plausible. Yes.
Yes. It is also in itself a theory of relevance realization and its importance. And that it is a naturalistic account. That's what he's saying. He's giving a naturalistic account of relevance realization. He is convinced that he is showing us that you can look at the brain and see relevance realization type of thing. It's all there.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what he's saying.
Yeah. He gets into this part where he's like breaking out the 4 Ps.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. It's a salience landscaping, I think, and he shows how they all play in on each other. I don't really get why that was mentioned. It just feels like this is an additional thing that if he didn't mention it, I would not have understood. Not, I don't really see how mentioning this is super important. Maybe I think that's what he means with salience landscaping, and he just
Yeah.
wanted to remind us what salience landscaping is before he explained how salience landscaping plays into the 4 Ps.
So how does salience landscaping play into the 4 Ps?
Well, I have it on the perspectival level. But
Yes.
before we get to the perspectival level, of course, we're getting to that whole bottom level, the thing that grants everything, relevance realization itself. And then I have an equal mark. I don't know if that's correct. The core machinery of your participatory knowing,
Mm-hmm.
how you are being coupled to the world so that co-evolution, reciprocal realization can occur. I know these I wrote down word for word because I thought it was pretty nice. So relevance realization is the core machinery of participatory knowing. And then salience landscaping is the perspectival knowing, dynamic situational awareness, the textured salience landscape. And the different types of knowing really play into each other as well. That's also what
Mm-hmm.
he shows. It's like it's grounded in relevance realization slash participatory knowing. And from relevance realization, this salience landscaping occurs, or perspectival knowing occurs. And then we get to procedural knowing, affordance. At first I wrote affordance landscape, and then affordance ovation, which means it makes it obvious. Some things just become obvious. Basis of procedural knowing. So procedural is how should I act? What should I do?
Yeah, that's really, I mean, when you put it into those big, thick, intense words, then it sounds much more complicated than it is. But it's really just saying, like, you walk, uh, for example, you walk into a space, you find what's relevant, you become situationally aware because of what's
Yeah,
relevant.
yeah,
And then it becomes obvious what you should do.
yeah.
If you ever needed a step-by-step program, this is it. This is the one you want to subscribe to.
Walk in, become
Become
aware of the
situationally
situation,
aware.
pick up. Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's even pick up is even better words. So because we want to make it as simple as
Yeah.
possible. Walk in, so participate. Walk in, show up. You can also say just show up. Um, pick up what's, and then it's obvious.
And then from there, it's obvious.
And then what you need to do will be obvious.
Yeah.
Show up, pick up, and it will be obvious.
Then it's obvious.
There you go.
Then it's obvious. Okay, I like it. Um, and then yeah, situational awareness trains the skills that give us the higher order of relevance realization. There's a nexus between ACT, the aspectual, the centrality, and the temporality, the here-ness, the nowness, and the togetherness.
I do want to say, I think my word that I coined last time, instead of togetherness, thisness will be
Thisness.
better. Because it's the aspectuality, right?
Yeah,
It's the thisness
it is. It is the
that,
thisness. Because he
yeah,
said, I don't want to use unity, so we'll use togetherness.
yeah,
Togetherness is not it, it's thisness.
yeah, it's thisness.
The here-ness, nowness, and thisness. I'm writing it
Yes.
down.
Rick was so sweet in the meditation yesterday. He ended with here-ness because I mentioned it like last week when after meditation when we talked about it. So he actually used here-ness, nowness, and thisness in his meditation. It's
Nice.
so cute.
Oh. Okay. Aspectual, this thisness that you're talking about, it's not all properties but aspects. It's aspectualized.
It's the features that's foregrounded and framed.
And we're talking about a nexus point, so it's going to be between all of these things. So that thisness, how you import or how important it is the centrality, and then time, the temporality, the nowness. That's
Well, the centrality is it relates to you. It's like how much ever we want to say in the spiritual world, it shouldn't be about you. The fact is, you're a living organism. It's going to be about you. It's about your needs and your cares. So you see things are salient in relation to you, what your needs, your cares. That's the centrality. You are central in this
yeah, okay.
because you're seeing it from your perspective. You're seeing it from here.
Yeah.
And then the now is what I mentioned earlier. It's not just about a place in time, it's about small variations can have major changes. It's about the timing.
Nowness. And all of that's the function of consciousness. That's what consciousness does. It reveals the thisness, nowness, and here-ness.
Yeah. Because if I remember correctly, the pure consciousness event, it's an altered state of consciousness where everything falls away, like blue falls away, all those things fall away. But what stays is the here-ness and the nowness. And then I would think then also the thisness stays because the together, that's why he says unity, but the togetherness I know also stays in that because that being connected, that feeling of being connected, of being stays, and here and now stays. But all the qualia falls away. But these things stay in that state of consciousness. To me, it feels like that's the core
Yeah.
consciousness.
Uh-huh.
I
Yeah.
think.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
is it. Yep, that's right. I
Yeah.
remember that now. Yep.
Yeah.
That's been a while.
Yeah.
Okay, and perfect. You led us right into this new argument.
Oh
This new
yes.
argument about why altering states of consciousness can have such a profound effect on the identity, to agency, sense of insight, um, dramatic coupling to environment, all of those things. The altering that state of consciousness can have such a profound effect on all of those things.
Well, I wrote down, and I thought it's prophetic, altered stage of consciousness to follow. All of those things that he wrote on the board today. And that's why I think before we go on our pilgrimage, I'm serious. Like we should draw that on the board, like this episode, and look at it and talk about it and explore it. Maybe design a ritual even to, make the most of it. And because all of that explains like the profound things that we experience and how that can be life altering in all the stages of consciousness. And I was also, and I mean, when he talked about how brains, when they're together, start wiring together or form synchronicity, I'm like, we were together last time 3 days, and that was profound. The five of us are going to be together for 7 days, the two of us for even longer. There's going to be some serious synchronicity forming. So there's going to be an altered state of consciousness experience. That's just a given.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to prepare for that.
Yes, definitely.
And it's so cool because the last meeting was between the two, you remember, there was like altered states of consciousness 1 and then altered state of consciousness 2. And then we met in between that. And like, yeah, it's pretty cool.
You're gonna love what we're meeting for with this too.
what,
So
what are we meeting for?
that's cute. Okay, I still
Yeah.
have a little bit more in here. So Montague, this like last part that he talks about Montague and what we were kind of getting at, that relevance realization is about caring. You and I were talking about this before we started the recording. This is really sweet. Like this is really, I love this. Like it's not all for just science for the sake of exploring science and just furthering our intellectual endeavors as humans, because this is what we excel at doing, is making patterns and consciousness. That's kind of our thing. So he, the fact that all of this comes down to because we care. Why do we do all of this stuff? He says relevance realization is about caring. Things are salient. They catch your attention. They motivate you. We're emoting. We're moving towards action because we find things relevant. And
Mm.
even Heidegger, at the core of our being is caring.
And I wrote down at the guts of consciousness / intelligence is caring. And if you then equate consciousness with God,
Yes, about that. Dratus says
Kratos,
computers cannot care.
oh, well, there goes the dream of the computers being our gods, right?
I mean, just following along with the argument. Yeah, they don't have the optimal gripping that our consciousness has. Um uh, all of this machinery of relevance realization is inherently transjective. We and our intelligible world co-emerge. We participate in it.
They don't have the motivation for optimal gripping that we have.
Okay.
That's
Like
the
that.
thing.
They are not autopoetic. They are not self-organizing, and therefore not therefore, but just and they don't have the motivation for relevance realization because of those things, because they're not self-organizing, they aren't autopoetic.
It's not so much about the self-organizing, because we can make them self-organizing, but it's about what drives that self-organizing. And for us as living creatures, it's survival. It's
Right.
staying alive. It's, our well-being and the well-being of those we love. But what would drive them, unless we are capable of giving them the capacity to care, would be because my program says so. So it's a different drive, very different. And maybe I actually get scared of thinking what would happen if we gave them the capacity to care about their survival.
Because man, this would fuck us up bad. Unstoppable. Like, what is it when you care, even if you have no reason to, because you're essentially indestructible? Not necessarily. I mean, like, all of these parts of these machines can be deconstructed into their atomic parts. So there's that reason for concern. But yeah, what is that? What is that drive?
Maybe there isn't. I mean, I'm reminded now of the story that you told about the gods being jealous of us because we're mortal. We care because it makes our resources limited. And I don't mean that in a negative sense, but we do have limited time. We do have limited energy. So how we spend it is relevant. It's important. It has weight, in other words, it has meaning.
It's like what I don't know. Stepping away from these kinds of conversations is like walking away from God. It's like I don't want to go. Like we just got so close. Do you have anything else in your notes?
I do have Plotinus. I have nothing else in my notes. So my love-hate relationship. And as the sun sets in front of my eyes, and I'm staring directly into the sun now, yes, but and now I can't see.
And I'll say, as the sun's moved into Aquarius officially, Pluto will come to follow, but the sun is officially in Aquarius.
The passage that I want to read is about thinking. In fact, one cannot say it thinks because it possesses itself, but because it looks to that which is first. But thinking, too, is itself the first actuality. If then this actuality is the first, there is no actuality before it. That which causes this actuality transcends it, so that intellection is second after this. For thinking is not the primary majestic thing, nor is all thinking majestic, but only the thinking that has the good, capital G, as its object. The good, therefore, transcends thinking.